We are back on MorningLine. Thanks for joining us. The topic, a serious one on human trafficking. It's not just sex trafficking, it be labor and such, but much of what they focus on is the sex trafficking, and it's not just adults, it's children that are sometimes brought into this horrible situation. Andrea Johnson's with us. She's End Slavery Tennessee. What do you do with them?
I'm the director of development.
Ah, okay. She just gave me
well, our
executive
executive director is sick this week, so you're stuck with me.
Well, I'm glad you came on, and you're doing a great job. This is something we need to educate people about. We've got a couple phone calls. Let's get to that, and the phone lines are open. Let's go to Joe first. Joe, good morning.
Good morning, Nick.
Hey, Joe.
Just listening to your lead-ins and your guest. You're exactly right on what drives this industry is customers.
Yeah.
And that's if there wasn't no customers, wouldn't be no business.
Right.
But I think your guest would agree one of the major contributors to this sex trafficking is drugs. Most of them that's what one of the lures they use to get them into this business is drugs. They get them hooked on drugs, and then they feed them little drugs along, and that's what keeps them going. But if there wasn't no customers, there wouldn't be no business.
That's right. I mean, that's on so many things. Yeah, if there's no customers, is it right about the drugs? Are most of these women addicted to something? Is that some of the hold that builds?
Well, that's certainly one of the lures into trafficking, but many times what we see is that women will either begin trafficking not as a result of drug use, but use drugs as a result of just a way to numb the shame and the emotions that they feel after a date, that, as they say, or a lot of times traffickers will actually use drugs to keep a girl compliant. So if you have a particularly willful victim, which some of the victims that we work with, are pretty spirited, a lot of times the trafficker will use drugs to keep that type of victim compliant so that she's easier to manage.
And is it typically work the way where then, how do they set it up? How do they shop them out? What do they do? How do the customers contact this group? Is it a subculture? What is it?
The majority now of what we are seeing is online.
So you'll go online and you find some kind of link somewhere and you make contact, and then you arrange what they bring them to a hotel room, or you have to go to them? What's it?
I mean, it differs. They have what they call out calls or in calls. There are actually websites where you can literally go just as if you were going to Craigslist and shop the adult ads and pick out somebody like you're picking out a piece of merchandise, call the phone number and arrange a date. And that's how it happens in a great majority of the cases.
Let's go to Tony. Tony, good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, Tony, go ahead.
All right. I've got some good insight into this. I was in the Middle East for 2 years, and this kind of thing is so prevalent in that area of the world. It's probably the hotbed for it. They don't particularly use castration to solve the problem. They'll use genital mutilation, and I hate to be graphic, but to sew the woman up so it can't happen. It's a terrible, terrible thing. And when I was there during the great tidal wave or tsunami that hit Thailand, and there were so many people down there trying to pick children and women out of the rubble, hundreds and maybe even thousands of people just down there picking through the rubble trying to find any victim that they could find. But they just cut off. I had planned to go there for my time off from Iraq, and I had to come home instead. And they just cut off travel in there completely because it was so terrible that the traffickers were in there trying to gather up victims. And I find it fairly ironic that this is happening now. And I know in this country we're pretty politically correct, and we tend to bury our heads in the sand from the truth sometimes. But I'll tell you now, if it's this bad now, it's going to get a lot worse because of the influx from that area of the world. There's just no doubt about it. Anybody with common sense cannot dispute that. But I ride around with some of my police officer friends sometimes, and I'm amazed by how many suicides there are, and that's covered up. It's a lot of us. We don't want people to know. It's an ugly side of the world that we don't want people to see. But make no mistake about it, it's the media that is fueling this. You plant those bad seeds from online in the human mind. All you got to do is have the right kind of soil for those seeds to sprout and grow.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of sickness in this country, a lot of sick minds in this country. I haven't had a computer in my home for 10 years, over 10 years now, since I've been back because of that.
Gotcha. Listen, Tony, you're right. I'm wondering if, and he's traveled the world and said what he saw. That's appalling, thinking about them picking through the rubble, trying to find potential victims to add to their group of folks that do this. But is it true? I mean, do some of these folks that end up here in this country come from outside the region? I mean, or are these mostly domestic women from this country?
We do see victims that are brought in from overseas.
Or
but
Mexico.
83%, I think, is the estimate now. 83% are U.S. citizens.
Okay.
So we are seeing. I mean, you see some of the busts of massage parlors and things like that, and typically those will be folks that have been brought over from outside of the country, but the vast majority of what we see are girls that are picked off from here in the country. I mean, we have seen people from all walks of life. I mean, it's certainly, we know there are risk factors that put someone at risk for becoming a victim of trafficking, but we have worked with people from virtually every zip code in Middle Tennessee. So being wealthy or affluent doesn't make you immune to trafficking lures given the right situation.
Yeah, I bet. I'm wondering, a lot of people, unlike Tony, who's seen some of this firsthand in his travels, may think of sex trafficking. And again, he talked about the media, and I want to bring this up because I think it's important to understand that a lot of people, when they think of this, if they go to movies, think of like the movie Taken with Liam Neeson, and the whole idea of, if you've seen the movie, it's about his daughter who goes overseas, and there's people out there scouting young women getting off planes before they go on a vacation, and they find a way to kidnap them, and then they sell them into some type of sex slavery to wealthy Europeans, or whatever. And I know there's movie to it, but people view it as that way. But that's not the reality, or at least if it is, it's a tiny percentage.
Right,
correct?
Exactly. That's a very, very small percentage of how this is actually happening. The majority of cases in the U.S. in particular are people being lured or trapped or coerced into the situation.
Okay. Meaning, and those people then have to be in a situation where they would be vulnerable to this. So they're targeting people, I don't know, women that need money badly, women who are addicted, women who are in a relationship and they don't realize where it's going. Is that it? I mean,
well, sometimes. So to understand sort of how it happens, you have to understand the continuum. In very young people, it's child abuse, it's violent home situations, it's possibly being in the custody of the state, maybe in and out of state custody due to family situations, and that's the beginning of
easy
the continuum.
Targets. You're right.
So then as those kids get older, they start to look for that love and acceptance outside of the home. So they become easy targets, and that's the continuum of folks that we are trying to work with, that we're trying to get people who have been targeted by traffickers, they are being completely used and exploited for someone else's gain before they get to the point where they are drug addicted and strung out and out on the street self-prostituting. So self-prostitution is on the back end of the spectrum with people who have just been basically turned out by their trafficker because they've used up their high profitability for these people.
Okay. I would think too, as we go to the break, we talk about most of the victims being female, but I would imagine there's males.
Absolutely,
too.
There are men and women. I use the term female because that's the majority of the clients that we work with, but we know that there are males. Actually, believe it or not, the average age of entry for males is younger than females. Average age of entry for males is 11 to 13 years old.
Wow.
For females, it's 12 to 14.
12. Really? That
Yeah.
young? So I mean, that even ups the ante even more in terms of the criminality of it, because these are
absolutely.
children. It's one thing if it's an adult, that's wrong, but children, I mean, it's just as bad as it gets.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay, we'll take a break on that note when we come back. More of your calls, Cindy, Bob, and others. Question, comment, or a story you want to share, like we heard from Tony, 737-7587. We'll be back right after this.